The same news was heard from all the monitors saying that the case of serial murders in Taejun had been replenished with new victims. Citizens expressed concern because even after 20 murders the criminal had not been found. Excluding the fact that the crimes were committed in the same city, no clear connection was found between the victims given their age and gender, and at that moment the news showed a photograph of a new victim. She stood there looking at the photo and listening to what was believed to be a non-selective attack and not targeting specific people, with police reporting that they were focusing on the possibility that this was the work of a copycat. She stood in front of her grave, looked at her photograph, and thought of only one thing: that Uni was no longer there. She was killed. The city continued to live its normal life. It seemed that nothing was happening in the city, and these murders did not happen. After visiting Uni's grave, she went to her work at WBC. And where is the badge where it was written that she works for this company and holds the position of reporter? In just a few minutes she was sitting at her workplace and wanted to see the latest events that had happened in the city, namely everything that was connected with the latest high-profile murders. She looked at the monitor and saw the place where the last murder took place. All these photos were from the police report from the crime scene. She looked at all these photos and didn't understand why nothing matched up, because there was nothing in common between all these murders. Since she couldn't understand anything, it irritated her even more, and it seemed that she was missing something in this whole situation. At that moment it was as if she had fallen somewhere deep into her thoughts and her memories, but nothing came to her mind. Whose voice was it that loudly said her name? Lee Se-ah. At that moment the girl opened her eyes and came to her senses. In front of her eyes stood a young man who asked her what was wrong with her. Did she really have a headache again? It was Yoon Yuhan. He suggested going to a place a little quieter. The girl did not resist and decided to accept his offer. After some time they were sitting in a cafe not far from their work. She, sitting with them at the same table, began to make excuses that everything was fine with her. She just passed out for a few minutes. The young man who woke her up, Yoon Yuhan, at that moment noticed that she had already spoken once and she ended up throwing up. Another guy who worked with her noted that it was not surprising at all, since only a few weeks had passed since this whole terrible situation. At that moment the girl turned around and saw that one of the places at their standing table was the very place where Uni usually sat. And she clearly remembered everything as it was on that very day when they sat at this table for the last time. Uni was very cheerful then, and it seemed that nothing could interrupt their good mood and nothing could happen to them. That's exactly how cheerful she remembered Uni. She wanted everything to remain the same as in her memories. But the very next day she saw her Uni's body in the morgue. She was not prepared for such a turn of events. When she arrived at the morgue, a doctor approached her and asked if she could confirm the identity of the deceased. She held herself back with all her might. There were tears in her eyes. Despite this, she squeezed out that she could confirm. When she saw Uni, she noticed that her face, which she often complained about as being too yellow, was paler than ever, and on the back of her hand she could see the number 2 carved into it. At that moment she realized that this meant that she had been killed by the most talked about serial killer in the world, and that this number he had set specifically so that everyone would understand that this was his work. Sitting at a table in a cafe and discussing this topic, one of them said how many of these victims there were. Probably 30. The second guy replied that the number of victims had already increased and was over 40. Then he added that it was necessary to take into account the imitators. Another girl sitting with them at the table noted that it seemed as if the world had gone crazy. This was about knives robberies. She didn't understand what the police were doing at all. One of the guys said that this bastard should be executed or something like that. He was aggressively inclined. We sat with our head down and looked down after listening to them all. She asked if there was any sense in this, since Uni would still remain dead. All the other guys, when they heard these words from her, fell silent and looked in her direction. They understood that she was completely right. Serial killers or robbers, she said. What was the point of reacting to something that had already happened? She didn't see any point in it. After which the girl grabbed her head again and said that don't they need some more suitable solution? She thought that it was necessary to identify dangerous elements of potential criminals in advance or something like that. She was sure that they should all be found and killed before they committed any crimes. Her friends sitting at the same table with her at that moment all looked at her because it was very cruel. The girl said that this is all she thinks about lately, and her thoughts are only about one thing: how to destroy all serial killers before they commit crimes. After sitting a little longer with her friends in this establishment, she decided that it was time for her to go home, so she went outside from the restaurant. When she came out, the young man turned to her and stopped her because he wanted to tell her something. It was that same Yoon Yuhan. He told her to be careful on the way home. He suggested that she go along Danshan Street. It is well lit and there are a lot of cameras on it. The girl, without turning her head, asked if this was true. The young man tried to answer her, but he spoke very indistinctly. After he collected his thoughts, he said that she could try to meet someone very nice. He added that people who could help her could be unexpectedly close to her. The girl, hearing his words, laughed. Of course, she understood that he wanted to take her home, but didn't know how to do it. She told him okay and thanked him. Despite all this, the young man remained standing in the same place and watched as she walked away from him along the street. There was someone else watching this whole scene, a third person who did not want to be noticed in this situation at all. This guy was watching everything from above. His face was covered so that it could not be seen, and on his head was a baby hood. After some time, she was sitting in front of her computer monitor and looking at the pictures she had from the crime scene. She understood that age-gender relationship, none of this connected the victims together. She reported to her management that the only thing that was hanging between all these crimes was the early ones in the form of numbers on the body. Her manager answered her that they don't know exactly what the motive is, what the numbers mean, and he also added that they don't know whether the criminal is acting alone or not. She couldn't find anything that could connect them, so she decided to reread every case she had. Maybe she missed something somewhere. The girl understood perfectly well that this was an unrelated murder of an unprecedented scale, but this does not mean that there were no witnesses at all. After reading several cases, she realized that occasionally after meeting with a criminal who left numbers, there were survivors. So she decided to talk to Ms. Lee Jae-yun, which was her alias that survived the 21st Division, and hear her testimony. The lady said that it was just a coincidence, and it just so happened that on that day they decided to eat at a restaurant together with her friend. She cried, and through her tears she said that they just went to a place where they usually didn't go. It was their mistake. Then her words became broken and indistinct. She began to tell how scared she was when she saw this criminal with a huge knife in his hand. And she was even more scared when he killed her boyfriend with his knife in front of her eyes. There was a sea of blood around, and she couldn't say anything else. And another guy who was a witness to the 13th case is Mr. Choi Chong-won. It was a huge guy who spoke so that the reporter would listen to him. He was sure that this is not the road that no one takes. It was this road that he decided to take with his two friends. At that moment, nothing seemed suspicious to him. After some time, when he realized that there was not a single soul around except them, then he became worried. Turning his head to one side and then to the other, he felt that there was only one person walking behind them, and he immediately had some inexplicable feeling. It was very much reminiscent of the feeling of fear. Then this gentleman began to tell that he had a feeling, as if he already knew all this, that everything would end exactly like this. The girl listened to every word he said. She had many questions, and she didn't get any answers to them. One of the questions she wanted an answer to was why only these people survived despite the fact that he killed others. She didn't understand Manhwa, why this criminal who put numbers let them go knowing about the possible risks. She listened attentively to the girl who was telling about the crime and who remained alive about what she heard with the voice, and the thought flashed through her head that she was going to die now. But then this criminal came closer to her. And when he was very close, it seemed that her heart was about to burst out of her chest. She could not move from the spot. The only thing she remembered was his gaze that looked at her through his long bangs and the mask on his face. At that moment, he told her that she was not number one. Even in her sleep, she couldn't relax, and all these crimes were dreaming to her. That's why she couldn't fall asleep. She thought that, for investigative reasons, the police do not release the numbers of the victims, so for her this was too little information. Analyzing on my couch, I understand that, to begin with, it doesn't enter her head that all this is possible in Korea. She had many questions about how a criminal could continue to kill without hiding the body and leaving no witnesses. After some time, she went to her work and sat in her place and turned on the computer. The girl was very surprised because her mail was simply overflowing with messages. When she went into her messages, she saw that these were messages from different people who wanted to tell her something. She looked at many of these messages and realized that among them there were really messages that could help her. And the most important thing is that this serial killer who leaves numbers does not kill everyone in a row but leaves witnesses, and her assumptions were true. Without thinking twice, she picked up her phone and started dialing one of the first numbers that left her messages in the mail. When this number answered, the girl said hello and said that her name was Lee Se-ah and she was a local reporter. She asked if they could talk about the letter that was sent to her by email. Having received a positive response, she hurried to meet the author who wrote her this letter. She walked down the street and thought that this was even better than she expected. Everything was working out for her, and maybe she would soon get closer to solving the mystery. Of course, she understood that she had a general idea and would have to look for more information. All this time, while she was walking down the street, someone was watching her from the side. The girl walked, didn't pay attention to anything. She was all in her thoughts. She was sure that she was digging in the right direction. Taking one step after another, she heard steps coming from behind her in sync with her. That's why she stopped to hear if those were really the footsteps that were following her. Without turning her head, she heard Tuda coming closer and closer to her from behind. And just the thought that this could be the same serial killer she was trying to expose made her feel creepy. She remembered the words of one of the people she had met, and one of those who had survived. He told her to listen to him carefully, that this was not the road that no one had walked, but when he realized this, there was not a soul around. She stood and caught herself thinking that everything was exactly as the witness had said. She took a few breaths in and out, convincing herself that she needed to calm down. She started moving forward, trying to convince herself that it must be just a simple coincidence and it doesn't mean anything. She remembered the words of the gentleman who survived, that he heard the steps of only one person who was walking behind. In her case, everything was exactly like that. She also heard the steps of only one person behind her. She didn't know what to do and was a little confused, but she knew she needed to pull herself together. Unexpectedly for herself, she made what seemed to her the most correct decision. She began to quickly run away without turning her head. She heard how this man was pursuing her. And after just a few steps, the man who was behind her caught up with her and tried to stop her with his hand. He pushed her forward so that the girl could not stay on her feet and began to fall. The very next moment, the girl fell to the ground and the man approached her. Raising her head, she saw only a huge hand that reached out to her and that wanted to grab her. She didn't know how to resist. There was fear in her eyes and she didn't know what to do. Unexpectedly for her, at that moment, Yoon Yuhan appeared and hit her pursuer. Everything happened very quickly. The girl was a little surprised where Yoon Yuhan could have come from. She didn't hear any other footsteps at all, but it seemed to her that this was a way out of the situation for her. The young man extended his hand to her. She grabbed his hand and was afraid to let it go. Yoon Yuhan will shout to her that they need to run away from this place as quickly as possible and pull her along with me. The girl wanted to ask the young man how he got here and what he was doing here, to which he replied that he worked nearby and did not understand what she was talking about. After which the young man asked her again who this crazy person was who was stalking her, thinking he said, "Is this really the same bastard, the same serial killer who leaves numbers?" Turning her head back, she saw that this guy continued to follow them and was not going to leave them alone. Yoon Yuhan told her that they needed to run to some crowded place, so he started pulling her along with him. He said that they most likely needed to stop by a restaurant, then in that case he wouldn't be able to follow them. After which he shouted that there was an alley ahead and that this was the shortest route to the main street. When the girl ran into this alley, she couldn't even imagine what would happen to her next. Raising her head, she saw that it was not at all by which leads to the main street. What was her surprise? She was standing in some kind of dead end and didn't know where to run next. She simply had no way out. Having caught her breath a little, she needed to figure out what to do next and where to run. She stood and thought that this was not an alley that led to the main street and she would not be able to get into a crowded place. The girl turned her head and looked at Yoon Yuhan and told him that this was actually a dead end. Why did he bring her here? At that moment, she saw how her friend's eyes became fiery red. They glowed, and the young man himself swung to strike her. He had a metal pipe in his hand with which he struck the girl. Blood spurted in all directions. She was lying on the ground. Her eyes were slightly open. The pain was simply unbearable, but she tried to control herself. The girl didn't move at all. She saw how the second guy who was following her approached her friend. When this second guy approached, he turned to Yoon Yuhan and asked him why he was rushing around, to which the young man replied, "Didn't he bring her as expected? There's no better place to be found." These two guys were standing over the girl's body and deciding what they would do next. At that moment, gathering all her strength, she tried to ask Yuhan why he was doing this. The guy who was stalking her told her that she was very quick on her feet and he already thought that he had missed again and would get it for it. She couldn't tell them anything else because these events didn't fit into her head at all. She looked at her friend Yoon Yuhan, who was holding a knife in his hands, and thought that this couldn't be. Was Uni's death really on his hands and not on the hands of the killer who left the numbers? The young man laughed and said that he was very grateful to this killer who leaves numbers. You can simply kill anyone and write a similar number on your hand. At that moment, he took her hand in order to show her how easy it was to imitate such a crime. The young man began to write a number on her hand with a knife. He said that this way they could confuse everyone and blame the maniac that everyone was looking for. He was grateful to him for giving them more freedom. When he wrote the number on her hand, he said that everything was ready and told his partner that now he could do whatever he wanted with her, but he had to remember only one thing. As soon as she stops breathing, she has to be his. That was his only condition. His partner did not resist much. He agreed with him and said that he was ready to begin, after which he extended his huge hand trying to grab it and said that now he was interested to see what it looked like inside. At that moment, they heard someone's footsteps behind them, so they froze in anticipation of what would happen next. There was now fear in the eyes of these two attackers. They understood that behind them stood the real killer who left the numbers. Turning his head back, one of the guys asked what this nonsense is, trying to figure out where this guy came from. Yoon Han tried to explain to that guy that he should enjoy the view as quickly as possible and get lost from that place. But this guy didn't move from his place. It seemed that his eyes were the only thing that was visible, and they were glowing bright blue. His whole face was covered by a mask and thick bangs hung down from above, and you couldn't see the guy's face at all except his eyes. It seemed like this guy had scanned this whole situation and he had already put numbers above each of them. After which he said only 2 words in words, "These are 4 and 1." Then he added that finally one was found. Raising his hand, he also said that he knew the alleged killer, and it seemed that everything was going according to his plan. 3 hours earlier, before these events, a girl was sitting in front of her, who was saying that she thanked this killer who put numbers on his hand. At that moment, she did not understand at all how one could express gratitude to a person who kills other people. But this girl continued to say that this killer saved her and saved her entire family. This was the 37th case. The survivor, Ms. Yang Soo-yeon, gave testimony. At that moment, the girl wanted to ask this lady if she really witnessed the incident with her ex-lover. Did she understand everything correctly? After all, this is exactly what was written in the case of the 37th murder where a young man died. The girl who was sitting opposite the reporter was surprised because she called this man her lover and added that she was being very generous with her expression considering the situation that this bastard had created in front of her house. This so-called lover grabbed her by the hair at that moment and hit her several times in the face. She could not resist him. Then the reporter said that then she would not speak of a lover but of a victim who was killed by a maniac who puts numbers on the bodies of his victims, and at that moment she was nearby and video of the killer. The lady continued to tell that when her boyfriend was hitting her right next to the threshold of her house, the same maniac killer number appeared, as they all call it. The journalist asked the lady because she could have found herself in an extremely dangerous situation. She asked why then the lady was saying that this killer saved her. The lady smiled, lowered her head, and answered, does she really think that she could have died at that moment too? The journalist sat and looked at the lady, waiting for what she would tell her. She was interested in every word she said. Now when she was lying on the ground and next to her stood 2 guys who wanted to kill her, and one of these guys suggested that he enjoy the view so that he would get lost from this place as quickly as possible. It became clear to her who this killer number leaves alive and who he kills. Everything was the same as the lady she interviewed told her. Raising her head up, she saw a guy with a mask on his face and long bangs hanging down. This guy said only 2 words. The first was found and the second was the alleged killer. After which he took a few steps forward and Yoon Han and his partner were already a little tense. I don't understand what will happen next. These 2 still hoped for their impunity, so one of them grabbed the metal pipe lying on the ground, the same one with which they had hit the girl. Yoon Han's partner swung his arm and shouted for that bastard to get lost, to which Yoon Han told him to stop. But this guy was waving his huge metal pipe. I don't understand. Is it possible that the person in front of them is deaf and doesn't hear what they said at all? The events that followed happened very quickly. The guy who was holding the metal pipe felt the blow. Ida hit from below, and it was so strong that he couldn't hold the pipe in his hand. The metal pipe that fell from his hand flew to the side, and this masked stranger dealt a few more blows to this guy. These blows were so strong that the pursuer, who had been confident for a few minutes, was already coughing up blood. The girl continued to lie on the ground. She was confused, but Yoon Han was even more confused. He did not understand what would happen to him next, as his partner was already lying on the ground and writhing in pain after receiving several blows. The guy in the mask first made a check forward, then stopped and turned his head to see what was wrong with the guy he had just stopped. After which the guy in the mask said that he was number 1, thus he put a mark on him, which meant that he was no longer a tenant. At that moment, the journalist remembered one of the interviews she had taken the day before. The girl had then told her that the killer had told her that she was not number 1. After which the man in the mask looked at the second guy Yoon Yoo-han and said that he was number 4. His fate had also already been decided. At that moment they all saw a sharp knife that appeared in the hand of the guy in the mask. He repeated number 4 again. The mask guy was not a man of many words, but he did say something, and at that moment he said that number 4 was the target for destruction. Yoon Yoo-han, when he heard the word number, he was just in shock. He didn't know what to do next. He stood, as if spellbound, and looked at his opponent. When the man in the mask pushed off and headed in his direction, the only thing he thought was, no, this can't be. Yoon Yoo-han stood motionless for a while. They understand what he should do and how to avoid this fate. The only thing that came to his mind was to take out his knife, which he was already waving around, scaring the girl. The masked man immediately saw the knife in his hand, but despite this, he did not stop his attack. He continued to move forward. Before the eyes of the guy in the mask, whose number everyone was calling, the numbers appeared one after another. 3127450. Approaching Yoon Yoo-han, he swung to strike, but the young man swung back. Yoon Yoo-han wasn't going to give up so easily, so he decided to take advantage of the fact that he had a knife and could fight back too. But the knife in his hand was immediately intercepted by the guy in the mask. He squeezed Yoon Han's hand very tightly, after which the guy at the mask took out his knife and turned it several times in his hand, making it very easy. Yoon Yoo-han, despite the fact that they tried to stop him, dealt 2 blows to his opponent so that blood spurted out. At this moment Yoon Yoo-han relaxed a little. He even laughed loudly, considering that his opponent was weak. But in front of the guy who was wearing a mask, a clear row of numbers lined up, and the last number was 4. After which the guy with the mask raised his leg to hit Yoon Yoo-han and started attacking him. Behind the masked guy, Yoon Yoo-han's partner rose from the ground. He came up from behind and swung his arm to hit him. The girl journalist continued to lie on the ground all this time. She did not take her eyes off them for a second. She thought of only one thing, watching everything that was happening and remembering what happened at the very beginning. This man in a mask said 2 numbers 41, and after that he said found. At that moment it was like he was scanning these 2 guys, and he was talking about the fact that the alleged killer had been found. The girl journalist, putting all the events that were before her into one whole, now understood that her assumptions were correct. After all, it was always a mystery that there was no connection between the victims, and that is why no one could figure out this killer who left numbers on the palm of his hand. And most importantly, she never understood this killer's ability to hide from the investigation for an unnaturally long time. And the most important thing is who she has been communicating with lately, people who were able to survive the attack of this killer. Oddly enough, they repeated the same testimony despite the fact that they were completely different people, but the testimony of the witnesses was the same. And the most important thing that surprised her most was that this killer who leaves numbers on his hand always had knowledge of what would happen next. When the female journalist spoke with the last lady who survived 3 days ago, the lady said that when the killer number left and the police arrived, they found a dead bastard in the backpack. When they started to examine his things, very strange objects appeared, and most likely this bastard was not so simple, because they found butane gasoline and a torch in his bag. He had everything in his bag to start a fire. The lady then asked the journalist girl if she understood what she was telling her now. She said that if she had not crossed paths with the killer in front of her house that early morning, if only this killer who everyone calls a number only because he leaves numbers carved into his palm, if he hadn't killed that bastard whose bag the police found, then everything could have been completely different. Instead of this one bastard who was killed by the killer, instead of him, her whole family could have been burned alive, since he most likely was preparing to set her house on fire. The guy in the mask stood and looked down at Yoon Yoo-han. It seemed that he had no feelings at all and no pity for this future killer. Yoon Yoo-han, despite the fact that he was in a completely unfavorable situation, he was on the ground, but he still waved his knife and did not let the enemy get close to him. Suddenly the masked man raised his leg and kicked Yoon Yoo-han in the face with all his might, breaking his leg. After this one blow, the masked man dealt him several more blows to the head, and face Yoon Yoo-han could no longer resist. The man in the mask seemed to be doing his job. He continued to attack. His gaze seemed glassy. He just raised his leg and delivered one blow after another to the head of the guy who was lying on the ground. Yoon Yoo-han stretched his hand up, trying to tell him something, but it was all useless. No one listened to him or heard him. At that moment, the girl journalist sat down. She watched what was happening. She understood that it sounded crazy, of course, but nevertheless, from the moment she first caught herself on this outrageous thought, it never left her, and she could not get rid of it. At this moment, the thought occurred to her that perhaps this killer who is called by the number can see them in the future. And most likely when he sees these people in the future, he sees which of them will become murderers. The numbers he always draws on his hand are most likely the number of murders that could happen in their lives. If he said the number 4, it meant that Yoon Yuhan would most likely kill 4 people in his future. The masked man took a voice recorder out of his pocket and clicked it to record, after which he said that it was November 14th, 2026 time 22:35, after which he bent down and looked at the guy lying on the ground. He continued to record on the dictaphone that this was number 4 and his name was Yoon Yuhan. At that moment the guy lying on the ground was barely breathing. The young man in the mask continued to record on a dictaphone that by killing him, he would be able to save 4 people whom Yoon Yuhan would kill in the future. After which the killer's sharp knife was near Yoon Yuhan's throat. It seemed that nothing could save him. The masked man crouched down and asked the guy lying on the ground what his last words or wishes would be. Yoon Yuhan barely managed to squeeze out that he was a bastard. The man in the mask continued to talk about the small hope's unfinished business. He can say any last word, even a message to someone before his death will do if it is not beyond his capabilities. Yoon Yuhan couldn't believe that this was really his last minute of life. He started to swear loudly and cough up blood. He couldn't come to terms with it and didn't understand how these were his last words and who allowed him to speak like that. Could someone really obediently kill themselves? The masked killer continued to stand silently and listen to what else he would tell him, because this was not the first person who behaved like this in front of him. Yoon Yuhan told him again that he would not allow himself to be killed just like that. Then the masked killer said that he understood everything, and he asked the guy lying on the ground if these were really his last words, who would allow himself to be obediently killed. Yoon Yuhan was no longer so self-confident when she heard that these were his last words, and he also felt the tip of the knife touch his throat. One movement and he understood that he would not be alive. Then despair appeared in the guy's eyes and he began to ask for mercy. He began to say that they should not kill him and wait. Kill in a mask seemed to not hear him at all. His knife pierced his throat and blood splashes began to fly in different directions. It was clear that Yoon Yuhan was trying to beg for mercy at the last moment. With all his might he screamed to be visited. He simply begged, he asked to be spared just this once. The masked killer was a man of few words. He said that he wanted to be forgiven because he didn't think it was possible for him to put anyone in jail. After which he made a sharp movement with his hand and blood splashed in all directions. The knife he used to cut Yoon Yuhan's throat was still covered in his blood and drops of blood were dripping off it. The girl journalist continued to sit on the sidelines watching everything that was happening, but she did not say a word. At this moment Yoon Yuhan's partner stood up. He was very scared by what he saw. The masked killer was holding his victim's hand at the time, and using his sharp knife he carved the number 4 into that hand. This was the number of victims that this man could have killed if he had survived. The number 4 appeared on his hand. At that moment, unexpectedly for herself, the girl journalist asked the killer if he was really not going to pursue the second guy. Without turning his head, the killer said that number 1 is not a target for destruction. Killing one to save another is wrong. The girl thought completely differently. She thought that it was necessary to stop it anyway for the sake of at least one person's life. The masked killer answered her that +1 and -1 are the same as on a chessboard, which equals 0. While talking to her, he did not turn his head and did not look in her direction even once. In fact, she sat and thought that this is the kind of logic that is very difficult to accept under normal circumstances. However, she said that she thought she understood that these were his own rules, and standing on her feet, she asked him to let her. She could barely stand on her feet. Holding her shoulder with one hand, she told the masked killer to let her help too. She thought what he was doing in this situation was always similar to her thoughts, especially after Uni's death. After which she added, if only she could identify future killers, if only she could recognize villains and judge them by the rules. She has seen more than once how things really happen, and not everything is always according to the law, and not always the villains are caught. The girl said that she is a reporter and she can help him if he wants to be heard. Make his voice loud and spread it. At that moment, the masked killer asked her if she was sure she could help him. After thinking for a bit, he asked her again if she really held the same opinion as he did. After which the masked killer took off his mask from his face. At that moment silence began. None of them continued this conversation. The killer then looked at the girl and said if everything is as she says, then he won't go on about it. He, like last time, took out a dictaphone from his pocket and clicked to start recording. Coming closer to the girl, the journalist said that he wanted to hear her last words or wishes. She was confused. She didn't understand what was happening in this situation and why he didn't pay any attention to her at first and now reacted like that. She saw his gaze, which seemed to scan her and all her desires. At that moment, the killer looked at her and the video showed that the number 12 appeared above her, which meant only one thing, that she could kill 12 people. He told her that all human lives are equal, and only this is the truth that helps him move in this chaotic world. He knew who is good and who is bad. And he also always knew who should live and who should die. He was absolutely not interested in who would bring more benefit to this world just like this time. When the police found 2 more corpses, one of these corpses had the number 12 carved into its hand with a knife. This was the corpse of that same journalist girl. The killer believed that if he didn't know anything, he was simply getting rid of the numbers he saw in front of him. He did everything to save as many lives as he could. That was his purpose. It was precisely for the sake of saving as many lives as possible that he killed other people, those very same murderers. Already that evening, the news reported that the national-level case of serial murders in the city of Daejeon, also known as the case of the killer whose number is called, continues to inspire copycat crimes. The TV was turned on loudly in the cafe, and each of the visitors and employees could hear that on the night of the 14th, the police received a report that a man and a woman had been killed by a killer whose number was given. The waitress paused for a second to watch the latest news that was being shown. She saw that they were saying that it turned out that there was also a conspiracy to kill, and they showed one of the attackers. She said that you were involved in conspiracies there, Mr. A. It was he who reported what happened, and one of the victims, Mr. V. The waitress stood listening attentively to the news. She even forgot for a while that she was at work. The news continued to talk about the fact that it was announced that there was a high probability that this was the work of a copycat of Mr. A. At that moment, the cook's voice came from the kitchen. He said that the order was ready. The girl answered that she only needed a minute. The news continued to say that all this indicates an attempt to close the murder committed as a result of the conflict by presenting it as the case of the number killer. At one of the tables sat a young man who was listening attentively to the same news and drawing something in his notebook. He didn't communicate with anyone at that time. He ordered 1 cup of coffee to start with. He also listened to everything that was said on the news about how, first of all, their country had never had a serial killer of this scale. The most famous serial killer was Mo Hong-chul in 2012. After this case, there were no more serial killers. The young man, without raising his head, ordered 2.5 cups of coffee with caramel. And his choice fell on the simplest item on the menu, a sandwich with chicken strips and cranberries. And for a side dish, he ordered an egg with a piece of waffle. It was one of the dishes, scrambled eggs with fruit waffles. He believed that, in order to eat it at the right time, he first had to drink about half of the coffee he ordered. He also visited this cafe very often, and one of the places he liked was the table near the second window. He always sat in this place and could see the workers in the cafe who were moving around the hall, and he also had a good view of all the customers entering and leaving. At the same time, he could look out the window and he could see people standing at the intersection right in front of him. He had a very good view from behind this window of everyone who was moving near the Changil station. The whole point is that he was the very person who could see the numbers above people and could scan them. It was the perfect place because he could keep them all in sight and see the numbers above them. That's exactly why he came to this cafe and sat down in this place. He looked and observed all the people at the crossroads. He could also watch everyone who entered and left this cafe. This time, when he was sitting and looking at the intersection, he saw a girl who was walking straight along the intersection, and she had the number 2. Look carefully out the window. He saw another one under number 4. This man seemed to him simply handsome. He thought that apart from all the others, this guy had a high score on this street. Then he turned around and saw the waitress girl. She had the number 1. He thought that number 1 doesn't count. Then he thought, because these were the only targets left in this area, and he had already seen them several times. But all this was not what he needed, and he drove these thoughts away from himself because the procedure for choosing a target was very simple. He needed to see a very large number that was supposed to appear above the head of one of the people passing by. And he also needed to see the number that should flicker the most, which means it should be the most plausible, and these murders will be real, as he saw at that moment the number 5 above the head of one of the guys at the crossroads. When the waitress came, she was very surprised. She apologized for the fact that the order was a little delayed. She tried to explain that it took a little longer to prepare the sandwich and waffles with apple jam. Raising her head, she realized that no one could hear her explanation since the client was no longer there. The waitress continued to stand near the table for a few more seconds, but there was no one to give her order to. She looked at the fact that the cup of coffee remained untouched. She did not understand where this customer could have disappeared to. For the order on the table, he left money. In another establishment, several guys raised their glasses of beer and began shouting loudly that they needed a drink. At the table sat a large number of huge guys who spoke loudly and raised their glasses to the Capson gang. Immediately after they knocked it out, shouts were heard again, and they began to continue making loud toasts. This time they drank to the Guksh gang. People sitting at the knocks not far from them could not communicate calmly because they constantly heard screams. One of the waiters approached the man sitting at this table and addressed him. He told the gentleman that this could cause inconvenience to other customers, so could they please speak more quietly? Before he finished his speech, one of the guys sitting at this table threw a bottle at him, so that it smashed against the wall and the shards flew at other customers. The guys were very angry that they were reprimanded. They looked at the waiter again and asked what he was talking about and which customers they might be disturbing. One of the guys prepared another bottle to throw at the waiter. The girls sitting next to this table hurried to leave this place as quickly as possible. One of the customers picked up the bottle and shouted at the waiter to come to him immediately. At the table where the loud shouts were coming from, someone asked the waiter to just bring more beer. Two guys sitting at the table continued their conversation. One said to the other that he congratulated him on the postponement of the sentence. The second replied that it was all thanks to the lawyer. He was definitely worth his money. And this guy also said that he heard that the punishment for drunk driving has been tightened, so if he had gotten caught by someone else, he would have definitely gotten into trouble. His interlocutor began to ask if he had really made a deal with the father of the girl he had hit. The guy said that he had done it with difficulty, since even the words that he would give him any amount of money did not calm this father down. This guy was saying that he just drank and got behind the wheel. Of course, he was a little wrong, but not so much that he would go to jail, and he didn't understand what they wanted from him if it had already happened. This bastard didn't understand if the girls he hit could grow their legs back. He thought that this girl just needed to think that she was already a cripple and that this was probably her fate. He didn't understand the point of dragging a person who had a great future ahead of him into this. That's why he brought his guys and scared her old father. Only after that he calmed down. He didn't understand why he couldn't do it right away. His interlocutor believed that sometimes they encounter bastards with a dog's strength of will that need to be broken. When evening came, all the visitors of this restaurant left it and went out into the street. Among them was that very noisy company. This guy who was released because he hit a girl while drunk went to his car and got back behind the wheel. His friends looked at him and said that this bastard got back behind the wheel. One of them approached him and reminded him that it could be the end for him if he was stopped by a police officer, and then he would have to arrest him again, to which the guy sent him. After which he set off. His friends wished him to return safely, and not to be caught. He drove along a practically empty road. While he was driving, he began to feel that the alcohol had hit him hard in the head and he wanted to sleep. Vicky was getting heavier and heavier. He couldn't control the situation and was driving almost on autopilot. At that moment his foot pressed on the gas and he began to drive even faster. Until he switched off, he saw that there was a pedestrian crossing on the road ahead with a lot of people standing on it. I approached this pedestrian crossing. He didn't even think about stopping and slowing down. People without breaking the rules went out onto this pedestrian crossing. At this point the driver's eyes were already closed and he could not control the situation. He simply did not see anything. Someone's voice from behind ordered him to also turn the steering wheel to the side. This guy's eyes instantly opened and he felt a knife being brought to his throat, and this man who was sitting behind him ordered him to turn away. The guy turned sharply to the side to avoid hitting pedestrians who were crossing the crosswalk. People near this pedestrian crossing were a little shocked by what was happening on the road. The guy sitting behind the wheel was so scared that he was ready to do everything that the man sitting behind him and holding a knife to his throat ordered him to do. The masked killer ordered this guy to drive forward and then at the second intersection turn right and drive to the edge of the road. The guy did everything he said because he felt the knife getting closer and closer to his throat. The killer in the mask saw how the number 5 began to see and change above his head, and the flickering was completely different. He thought that these flickerings were a sign that the number would soon decrease and would no longer be the number 5. The guy sitting behind the wheel didn't understand at all what was being discussed and why he was talking about the number 5. The masked killer continued to say that 5 is a sign that within 24 hours or even 10 hours he will kill someone. After which he told the guy sitting behind the wheel to stop the car and move to the passenger seat, and then he said that if he had any last words or wishes he would listen to them while he counted to 3. After which he began to say 3, then he said the number 2, at which point the driver pressed the gas. And then he abruptly pressed the brake pedal. He understood that his life was hanging on Valka and he needed to do something. Hearing the number 1, he saw a knife being carried right in front of his face. At the last moment the guy was able to lead the masked killer by the hand and grabbed the knife by the blades and held it. The masked killer wasn't going to back down, so he knew what he was doing and he knew how it would end. At that moment the car started moving and began to drive on the road without control. It seemed that she was going one way then the other and no one was controlling her as there were actions taking place inside. The driver of this car was able to keep himself alive for a while with these actions. He thought he could handle this guy, but the killer grabbed him by the head and slammed it against the car window. So he was able to hold his head and hit it several times on the glass to let go of the hand and the knife he was holding. And he succeeded in this. The next moment the guy let go of the knife blade and the killer's hand. As soon as he let go, but the killer from behind inflicted several live wounds on him all over his body. The driver was not going to give up. He tried to find something with one hand to resist. But I felt a strong pain. He pressed the brake pedal. He understood that he could not go any further. The car was thrown from side to side several times, but eventually he was able to park on a trained road. For some time she just stood there blocking one of the traffic lanes, at which point they changed places. After which this car moved off and continued its movement along the lane it needed. The same masked killer was driving, and next to him in the passenger seat sat the driver. All his clothes were covered in blood. At that moment the masked killer took out a voice recorder and said that it was 2026 November 15th and the time was 21:06. He said that the flickering had disappeared, but the number was still 5. The driver sat there not understanding who this man was. He wanted to know who sent him and why he wanted to kill him. The killer behind the wheel continued to say that he thought so that even if he prevented the murder, it would only delay the moment. Now he knows for sure that the number has not changed. The driver pulled out a knife he had found and swung it to stab his opponent. At that moment, the driver shouted for his opponent to die. Null is a piece of shit. He thought he could kill him with one blow. But he couldn't even imagine that at that moment when he would attack his opponent, he himself would die. His gaze went out. His body leaned forward and could no longer harm anyone. The seat he was sitting on was covered in blood. At that moment the killer turned off his recorder and said, okay, this time the guy didn't have the last word and he didn't wish for anything. After all, this was not the first time that before his death a person does not even want to believe that he has the last word. And this time he was able to stop the killer who was supposed to kill 5 more people. The next morning it seemed that nothing had happened and everything around was calm. The young man went to his favorite cafe. He approached the girl at the checkout and made an order. The girl was glad to see him again. She thanked him for the order and the young man paid her. After which he went down the stairs to sit in his favorite place where he could comfortably watch everyone else. On the way he saw a waitress who was holding 2 boxes in her hands. As he walked down the stairs he thought subtly about one thing. That he had come very far and it was time for him to make a decision. The girl was holding these 2 boxes and it was clearly hard for her. She was trying her best not to drop them. She couldn't see anything in front of her, so she asked for forgiveness for passing by him. When she turned to him, he remembered that it was the same waitress and that she only had the number 1 above her head. But this time there was a very bright flicker above her head and it seemed strange to him. The girl took a step forward to climb the step and placed her foot very awkwardly. At that moment the 2 boxes she was carrying fell out of her hands and landed on the floor. But along with these boxes the waitress girl also fell. The young man stood silently and watched everything that was happening. When she was falling he saw a very bright flicker and the number 16 above her head, which surprised him greatly. He couldn't even imagine that the numbers above people's heads could change like that, because yesterday when he looked at her he definitely saw the number 1. The waitress couldn't hold the boxes in her hands and all the contents started pouring out of the boxes. The girl even closed her eyes because she couldn't keep her balance and she was about to fall. At some point she felt that someone would definitely not let her do this, and from this she opened her eyes and looked forward. It was the same visitor whom she had seen more than once in this cafe. He grabbed her hand so that she wouldn't fall. The girl first tried to thank her savior, and then she said that she was doing everything wrong and asked him for forgiveness. Everything is fine with him. And another employee who was standing at the checkout came up to the noise and was scared by what she saw. The waitress started telling the owner that she was very sorry that it happened and that she couldn't hold the product in her hands and it fell on the floor. In turn, the hostess told the girl that she should be more careful and asked the visitor if he was hurt. The guy didn't answer. He stood and thought about only one thing. That this number appeared on her head. He couldn't understand what it was and why it happened. It was the same girl and she had light wavy hair like the one he saw before. I looked at her feet and they were wearing the same old dark blue sneakers and she was also about 160 centimeters tall. The young man thought that he remembered everything correctly and was completely sure that it was the same employee whom he had already seen and whose number was 1. He thought of only one thing. How could this happen and how could this number increase, because numbers do not change after they appear, and he had been convinced of this more than once. The girl began to justify herself and ask for an apology. She said that they were most likely very surprised, but she suddenly had a headache and she could not keep her balance. The young man looked at her without taking his eyes off her and could not explain what had happened. He lowered his eyes and read the badge that was on her chest where her name was written. The girl continued to talk about how they would clean up and he could go into the hall. He read her name and tried to remember that her name was Chi-hyun. He became very interested in it, and so he drew her portrait in his notebook. More precisely, her name was Mo Ji-hung, and now her portrait was in his notebook so that he could understand how this could happen. At that moment, the owner of the establishment approached the girl with the drops and asked her to open her eyes wider and look up so that she could put the drops in her. The hostess warned and said that she would drip first one, and then a second drop into her eye. The girl silently followed her instructions. The hostess told the girl that she closed her eyes again when she first dripped, to which she replied that she gets even more stressed when she starts counting. When the girls put drops in one eye, she said that she thought that everything was fine with her, after which she added that she would simply do this procedure herself later. After this procedure was completed, the girl looked to make sure that she could see well, but she still started rubbing her eyes and thought it was very strange because her eyes had been stinging a lot lately, to which the owner replied that most likely her eyes were very dry or she was sleeping too long. The girl said that she didn't know, but she had never had that happen before. The hostess asked her if she really wanted her to give back the drops that she was currently using. The girl was a little surprised by such a proposal. Then the owner said that she could use these drops until she got hers from the doctor. The girl was happy and thanked her. At that moment, the news started on TV again, saying that all these events indicate an attempt to close down a murder committed as a result of a conflict by presenting this murder as the work of the number killer. The hostess looked at the TV screen and said that they had already watched this program before they had it on repeat. Immediately after these words, the announcer asked what her guest thought about this professor. The professor replied that first of all, in their country, this is the first case of this scale since the Mo Hong case in 2012. The waitress girl listened attentively to every word that the professor said on the TV screen. It seemed that it somehow concerned her too. The professor said he could provide a graph analyzing the last two cases. The owner listened to this news. She said it is simply frightening. She can't even go anywhere. The professor on TV continued to talk about how both of these cases were far from murders committed for pleasure. The waitress got up from the table and said that it was time for her to go. After she got dressed, she said that she would go first and said goodbye to everyone. The professor continued to speak from the TV screen about how there was no connection between the victims either. The girl got dressed and collected all her things and quickly hurried to the exit of this cafe. Her shift was over. Bunny looked at her in the light and said that most likely she went to some other part-time job. The guy who was cleaning said that he also thought so. The owner thought it was pretty sad that at her age she needed to go to school and not do part-time work. She was also smiling, and it was also very strange that she didn't tell anything about herself at all. It seemed that she had no life. Of course, the cafe staff understood that she most likely had some reasons for this, and it was not at all pleasant to talk about her life. Then the girl was walking down the street. She felt that she was very sick. Stopping, she took a deep breath and then an equally deep exhale. She thought that she needed to breathe with her stomach. It would be easier that way. Closing her eyes, she took a few more deep breaths and then exhaled. This was the only way she could come to her senses. When she took her last breath, she felt some relief and realized that she could continue walking. As she walked further, she caught herself thinking that it was unexpected and that this still happens to her. Look at the time. She realized that she was already late and she needed to go faster and she needed to hurry. When she arrived at the place, when they saw her, they hit her on the cheek for being late. The man told her not to be late next time. The girl said she understood everything. He turned to her and said that he had told her not to take away the cutlery while the guest was still at the table. She believed that physical punishment was not a serious punishment at all, and that she just needed to endure short-term pain. She thought that just a few slaps that he gave her could be tolerated, and she played along with the old and decrepit theory of the boss. She understood that at her age she could work more than she was supposed to and earn more money, and she had no reason to give up this wonderful job. But sometimes when she had absolutely no strength, she would lightly pat herself on the shoulder, and making an effort to lift the corners of her mouth, so that everyone around her could see her smile, and no one could even suspect that she was in a bad mood. People sitting at a table in this cafe shouted to the girl that they had not decided on an order. She immediately said that she was coming. The client ordered her 4 servings of stewed meat, 2 servings of assorted meat, and she understood that if she continued to do this she would find herself One of the people sitting in this cafe kept looking at the girl and watching her. This guy turned his head and looked at her and shouted, "It's her Ji-hyun." The girl was in no hurry to turn around. She recognized this voice and she felt uncomfortable meeting this guy. This guy kept saying that it was really her. All the other guys sitting at his table looked in her direction and the guy asked if she really lived there. The guy sitting next to him started asking who this girl was and why he didn't know her. Then this young man replied that he and she had studied in the same high school and his friend did not know her because he had studied in a different elementary school. Then his friend said that he was not at all interested in who she was, and he did not want to know anything about her. She did not turn and did not look at her classmate because she clearly remembered how they wrote to her that the killer should die, and she also could not forget the news that she watched today where they said first of all in their country this is the first case of such a scale. After the 2012 Mo Hong case, she told herself to shut up and stop and not let any words escape her mouth. This guy who was her classmate shouted to the whole cafe that this is the same daughter of the maniac killer Mo Hong Chul, and his friend should remember because then they were still in elementary school. The girl tried to restrain herself with all her might. She covered her mouth with both hands. The only thing she felt at that moment was wild pain. The guys at the table where her classmate was sitting looked at the girl and said, "Is this really true, and does this maniac killer really have a daughter?" The girl again felt that her eyes were burning and stinging badly again. It was an unbearable pain, but she tried to endure it. Her classmate came up to her and said that in any case he was happy to see her in such a place. When he saw her, he almost went crazy. They were surprised when she suddenly disappeared. The other girls sitting at the table with him asked the guy how his relationship was going and laughed loudly. The guy replied that they were just ordinary fools and she was just a friend and nothing more. At that moment everything seemed to go dark in the girl's eyes. Only some numbers were visible above each person and she could see a flickering. She was getting worse and worse. She had no choice but to hurry and leave this room as quickly as possible to tidy herself up. After leaving this cafe, she leaned against the wall and took a few deep breaths again. She thought that this could help her. But this time it was much stronger than the previous one. Tears were flowing from her eyes, and it was unbearable to stop them despite the fact that she tried and tried with all her might to calm down. The girl thought about what it was and what was wrong with her eyes because this happened to her for the first time. She had never had such a strong attack before. She continued to stand leaning back and thought only about her eyes and about what she saw in front of her, this flickering and some numbers above their heads. From the roof of the house opposite, they watched her to see how she was behaving and whether she would be able to return to normal. It was the same killer who put numbers on the hands of his victims. This time he was watching a girl. When he looked at her, he thought that this was the same girl with light wavy hair that he had seen before, and she was wearing old dark blue sneakers. He started watching her right after he saw the number of her head when she dropped huge boxes in the cafe. Then he was very surprised because he saw that there was a flicker above her head and the number 16 was written. He only thought that he couldn't have mixed them up. They were the same girl, but she had different numbers above her head. That's why he decided to watch her. He thought who she was, this Mo Ji-hyun. And she in turn stood below, closing her mouth and trying with all her might to bring herself back to her normal state. Some time ago, many journalists wanted to film and interview the very same maniac who was the girl's father. Journalists asked him what the motive for his crime was, and they also wanted to know if he felt guilty towards the families of his victims. Since he did not answer them, journalists asked if it was true that even after confessing he was enjoying the right to remain silent. Then she sat with her mother and watched the news where journalists said that the police were going out of their way to protect a serial killer who had the highest number of murders in the history of their country. She was still a little girl then, and she asked her mother all this information about why her dad was on TV. She was only 8 years old when it all happened, and she couldn't fully understand what was happening. She watched how they treated her mother. Then a phone call rang at their home, and her mother told her boss in an upset voice that he couldn't treat her like that, so suddenly it was all because of her father. She was still a little girl then and didn't fully understand what was going on, so she went about her business. Her mother told her boss that these were just excuses and that this was not the way to approach the matter. He simply did not want to pay her the delayed salary. She believed that until that moment when this tragedy happened in their family, she lived as if in a half-sleep. Or maybe she just didn't want to face the truth, and that's why she pretended not to understand anything. When she was already 14 years old and one day she came to class, she saw that her desk was covered in writing and there was a lot of trash around it. Going out into the corridor near the principal's office, she heard a conversation between the rector and someone's parents who demanded that she be thrown out of school right now. The parents were saying that how good, in the opinion of the principal, a child who inherited his father's character could grow up to be. These parents were shouting what could she learn from such a father. She heard this whole conversation standing behind the door and could not object to anything. Then she met her friend who had tears in her eyes. Her friend could not contain her emotions. Then the girl turned to her, not understanding what could happen between them and what happened between them. When her friend came closer, she hit her in the face with all her might. In her eyes, Bonnie was furious. The psychologist who worked with her read her description very carefully. He wanted to understand how the girl felt. He said that her friend had lost her older brother 6 years ago. He was studying at the university, so they had quite a big age difference. And the psychologist also added that it seemed like her brother really adored his younger sister, which is why she was furious. The psychologist told the girl that she and her friend were quite close, and that is why she reacted that way. The girl began to talk about how when she was 6 years old her father left home, and she did not know or suspect anything. After that, until his arrest and the news on TV, she never saw him and didn't even know where he was or what he was doing. The psychologist said that it was appropriate to say something like that to him, but she should be careful in her statements. For others it might sound like an excuse. He tried to explain to her that everyone else would feel the same way as her friend. They would consider her to be the culprit of what happened. At that moment the girl raised her head and asked for a minute, would this really be an excuse? She smiled. She didn't understand what she had to justify herself for. Did she do something wrong? Did she just happen to be in the same class with her friend and became close to her, or was she not born the daughter of the most terrible serial killer? The psychologist tried to explain to her that this is not the issue. She cannot ask someone who is grieving for a deceased family member to understand her grievances. He warned that there will be more such situations in the future, and she cannot prove every time that she is not guilty. The psychologist told her that none of this matters and that she can't do anything about it. After all, this is her destiny. At that moment she wondered if she could express what she felt at that moment if she read more books. There was only one thing spinning in her head, and she didn't know what to do with this thought and how to live on. She now understood that Mo Hong Chul was her father's name, and it lay on her like an unbreakable curse. That day she could no longer work, so she decided to rest a little and sit on a bench in the park nearby. When the girl sat and watched the passers-by who were walking in this park, she wondered whether it had passed or not. But as soon as she squinted her eyes a little, she saw the same father that she could see before. And already before her eyes there were numbers above everyone who stood in front of her. Despite the fact that they were small children or already elderly people, there were still numbers above each of them. The girl squinted one eye harder to understand how she did it and how to get rid of it. When she opened her eyes fully, she saw an ordinary picture, the same one she saw every time and the same one everyone else saw. She closed one eye and thought that this was not a dream at all, but she wanted to understand what was happening to her. She caught herself thinking that she roughly understood that it was like a magic eye. She had to squint and see the numbers, something like that first, because she thought that they were showing her for some time. But then, judging by the sizes, this was not the case at all. The numbers could have been very large. After which the girl laughed loudly and without understanding asked herself what this was. Was it really some kind of rare disease that she had developed? The girl sat with her eyes closed when at that moment she heard someone's voice repeating after her. He asked what kind of illness it was. Opening her eyes, she saw a guy. It was Beck Min. She asked him why he came. The guy greeted her and said that he had something to worry about or something like that. Then the girl said no and added that the child would not understand this. The guy noticed that he was 1 month younger than her, and then he said that he came to this park only because she invited him and she treats him like a little boy. He laughed and threw her a small box, saying that it was a gift for her. The girl caught it without realizing what it was. When she looked and read, she was very surprised because it was a brand new hand cream, and she asked why he was giving it to her. The guy then looked at her and said, why is she asking why and asking such questions? Because it's her birthday tomorrow. And then he asked not for this. She called him. The girl turned and looked at him. She completely forgot that tomorrow was her birthday. After which the guy said that she didn't have anyone except him, no friends, so he suggested that she have a bite to eat and go to a club since they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He said that there was a new cafe nearby that served rice. At that moment the guy looked at the girl and fell silent because he saw that tears were running down her cheeks. He asked her why she was crying. The girl held back her tears and said no, it was just that her eyes hurt. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and did not understand what it was. It was very strange to her because in reality nothing like that had happened. She sniffed her nose again and thanked the guy for the gift. She said she was fine. She just had a bad day today and she had a lot of memories that she didn't want it all. These were memories of her father, and she also got a slap in the face from the owner and met a classmate who let me remind you who she is. The girl said that it was just very hard for her to go through all of this, but she tried very hard and will continue to try. It was a beautiful sunny day outside, and the boy and girl sat on a bench in this park for some time. When the guy listened to her story, he remembered this classmate. It was Kim Min-soo. He really studied with them in grade 5. Then the guy said that it was some kind of misunderstanding why she ran into him of all people. The girl tried to justify herself. She said that all this time she thought that she could cope, but as soon as these memories return, she starts to feel sick and her head spins and she can't do anything. She told the boy that he should remember how the parents of one of her classmates gathered to throw her out of high school. Then one of the parents said that she of course knows that it is not the girl's fault. Not all children become like their parents. She understands this, but she thinks realistically. And then this woman added that could the child grow up emotionally balanced when her father is in prison, and she doesn't know who will put her on the right path when she starts to stray from the course. Due to financial difficulties, the girl was unable to get an education, so she will unconsciously start looking for an easier way. This woman was shouting that she does not understand why they want to educate a future criminal in their school. The girl sat and talked about how all this time she wanted to prove that she would never become like her father and would live happily with a healthy psyche. She dreamed of living a full adult life like many others and enjoying this life. She said that she would never become a murderer like her father, but despite her opinion, no one believed her. The guy who was sitting next to her said that this was all some kind of nonsense, and it was enough that she was not her father. Did she really need to prove it? He didn't understand this whole situation. To which the girl replied that it seemed that everything in this world was wrong, and that a child who was still going to school could not understand this. The guy told her that, to be honest, he started to doze off halfway through her story. She replied that she didn't expect anything else. Then he stood up and said that he thought they would have to have some fun and spill all the crap. This is what can prove that she is happy, healthy, and dreaming about the future. At that moment, he extended his hand to her. The guy asked where she wanted to go first. There are no good movies now. Then in a cafe with board games. The girl smiled. She was ready to go to the club with him. She thought for a bit and said that the latter definitely wasn't, because he was a bad guy at games and wasn't ready to put up with her. He said that he had simply given in to her his whole life. After some time they were sitting in the club and playing their favorite game. She as always won against him and was happy about it. After that, they went to have a drink at karaoke. The guy took the microphone and she was ready to play along with him on the tambourine. They had a good time, left the club, and went down the road buying ice cream, which they decided to eat along the way. At that moment, she was completely different. She smiled for real, and it seemed that her life would never have what she fears most. He turned his head to the side, looking at the guy. She saw the flickering numbers above his head again. It was very unexpected for her. She looked and saw the numbers and saw how they were decreasing. Now she needed to understand what this even meant. Her face instantly changed, and she was no longer smiling. Then the guy asked if something was wrong. The girl just sighed. She said that everything was fine. The guy asked her again if she was really telling the truth. And the guy thought that it was very strange. It was all about her mood, and for some reason it seemed to him that they were being watched. That's why he looked around to understand why he had such an impression. He didn't say anything. He just thought and decided that they needed to go forward a little to see if it was his imagination. Someone very close to them was actually watching them. One of the observers said that they had already left. The second added that the guy turned around and that they were almost caught. One of the observers added that this is precisely why he said that we need to be more careful and stop behaving like idiots. The observer told the second one that he should take it more calmly because they went forward again. One of the TV programs showed the latest news about Emo Hong-chul's daughter, and there was this footage of her leaving the club with a guy. The announcer said that this girl lives very happily. This can be seen from her smile, and also said that the video that was sent to them ends exactly there. However, according to the sender, she obviously headed to a street full of clubs and bars. The announcer said that they can't know for sure whether she went to Potobnoy Place or not, but even in that case it can be considered that it's only high school students asking for trouble. The announcer continued to say that there is another funny fact. This video was filmed on November 17th, which means 2 days before the shooting. It was the day of remembrance of the 30th victim of Emo Hong-chul, whom he killed, and his daughter calmly walked down the street and enjoyed life. The announcer said that not to mention that the daughter of this killer is now about the same age. When Mrs. S was killed, it was simply unfair that some people see their children off on their final journey while others simply live happily and have fun. The announcer said that of course there was nothing wrong with this. The fact that this girl was the daughter of a murderer did not mean that she could not date anyone, but the situation itself was damn funny. It seemed to him that it all looked unfair. At the end, this announcer said that he concluded from today's lesson that he believed that God is dead if he allows such a situation. This report was also posted on the internet and was signed as a true educational report about the depraved life of the daughter of the most terrible serial killer in the Republic. After 5 hours, this video had 235 likes and many comments. One of these comments was that such children are having all sorts of fun and giving birth to children for themselves. Just think that the mouth of this killer continues. Another wrote that he understood in his mind that this was collective bullying of the girl, but he only had to think that he would end up in a class with such children. Her friend was heading towards her at that time. The guy walked past other guys who wanted to throw a rock at her window because they knew she lived there. He also saw that there were other guys standing near her gate and shouting that they just wanted us to go into her house for a minute. There were police officers near her gate who were saying that it was enough to shout. They were detaining them all because they were continuing to receive complaints. And there were also guys standing near her gate who were filming on their phones. They said that they were recording this report near the house where the killer's daughter lives, and they said that it was a crazy day. The guy came to the door and pressed the bell. He had a completely different opinion about all this, and he did not share their point of view. Her mother opened the door. He greeted her, and she told him that she was glad to see him. When they entered the apartment, the girl's mother said that she hadn't seen him for a long time and he hadn't visited them. Their house was a little dirty. He said that he didn't pay attention to it. He just wanted to know how Ji-hyun was. When he entered her room, he saw that the girl was holding a phone in her hands and reading all the comments that were left under the posted video. She was sitting under a blanket in a room without light reading all the comments when a guy came into her room. She seemed to sense him and said that he hid his face. Well, he asked her again what she meant. The girl said that if they film him coming here now, it will be another big problem for him. They will tell him that he is either a hooligan or lives with her. She continued to read and comment on what she read in the comments under the published material. She said that they are not crazy bastards and they don't know anything. The guy tried to contact her, but she acted like she didn't hear him. She said that it was 100% their business. She meant that classmate she met in the cafe. They saw her and followed her all the way home. The guy came closer to her and said that he perfectly understands what she feels, but now she should calm down. He covered her. Then he added that she knows perfectly well that she shouldn't react to all the words of these bastards. And he also said that they will all disappear by themselves when there is no reason for drama. The girl said without turning her head that she knows but still doubts it. It added asking the guy knows why she feels betrayed the most, because she is told that she will become a criminal, that it is her karma, that she will never grow up normal. She had heard this many times before. No one believed in her, and they said that she would eventually turn down the wrong path. And the most important thing that affected her the most was that as soon as she began to look as if she was living well and great, everyone who was on the other side began to swear at her, telling her who she was to live happily. She kept saying that she didn't understand what she was working for and what she was trying to prove in this life. All this time she forced herself to smile and be cheerful. The guy stood and silently listened to her whole story. She said that she didn't understand why she was doing all this. At that moment, the girl's mother entered the room and called the guy to come out for a minute. She wanted to tell him something. When he came out, the girl's mother said that she was simply starting to worry because of what was happening outside and how her daughter was behaving. She said that it must have happened to her because she works a lot. The guy replied that it was okay. Entrance exams were happening now, so they didn't have any classes anyway. The girl's mother thanked the guy for his support. The girl heard this whole conversation. She raised her head and looked at the guy. The girl's mother also said that if possible, it would be better for them not to go outside, and if anything happened, he should call them. She looked at him and saw numbers above his head. Oddly enough, this time there was a 3:32 ratio and a very bright shimmer around those numbers. She tried to close her eyes and say that no, she doesn't want to see anything and doesn't want to understand what it means. Opening her eyes, she saw that the 2 had changed to 1 and it was a completely different ratio, but the flickering was the same. The girl lowered her head and told herself that no, she doesn't want to know anything, but purely automatically Anapa asked that this value not decrease. The day was coming to an end and it was already dark outside. There were fewer and fewer people and the street lights began to burn. The guy opened the refrigerator and saw that there was no food in the refrigerator, after which he closed the refrigerator and thought that there was nothing that could be used and from which he could cook. He understood that even if it was late, he still needed to make her dinner. Now he needed to figure out how to get out of this house. He went up and looked out the window, but he saw that the guys who tried to throw a brick through the window were no longer there. They were all gone. He even thought that everything should be fine if he went out for a minute. So he shouted to the girl that he would quickly run to the store and asked her not to be upset anymore. When he entered her room, he saw her lying on the floor. He thought that she was most likely just sleeping after such stress. Approaching the door, he extended his hand and slowly began to open the lock. He could not even imagine what would happen next. Having opened the lock, he opened the door slightly and immediately saw that several people were standing in front of him. One of the guys who was standing on the other side of the gate joyfully shouted that the door had finally opened. At some point, the guy was confused. He couldn't even imagine that something like this could happen and that someone would be waiting for him on the street. One of the guys who was waiting shouted hello to him and then added that this is the place where the killer's daughter lives. One of these guys tried to ask the guy who he would be for this girl. Is he her brother or is he her boyfriend? The guy said no, but someone added that it was the same guy from the video. The guy was very surprised who these people were from. They didn't know her name. They tried to break in through an open door and didn't shout that they wanted to film content from 3 people, and they tried to find out she was here. The only thing they were interested in was whether the killer's daughter was in this house or not. But she didn't react to all these screams. The guy got ready and shouted at the gentleman that he was crossing the line and that he had to leave before he called the police. Well, despite this, the people who were standing behind the gate tried to break through the door and enter inside. They not only held the door with their feet, they also tried to open it with their hands, but they couldn't do it. One of the men who was standing on the other side of the guy made his way to him and looked the guy straight in the eye. The guy held the door handle with all the strength he had and tried to close the door back. But he couldn't do it. He understood that this was a strong enough person, so he told him to take his hand away. To which the man asked when he saw the guy he was Sun Hyang because he was wearing a school uniform. He said that more than 10 years had passed and the school uniform remained the same. His daughter also studied at this school and was about his age. The guy took his hand off the door handle. He was a little scared and didn't understand at all who they were talking about. The man continued to talk about how he had a very beautiful daughter. At that moment, the guy realized that the news was saying that the daughter was a killer and was now about the same age as when Mrs. S was killed. The only thing the guy thought was that this world was simply unfair. He understood that some were seeing their children off on their final journey while others. He didn't even have time to fully formulate his thoughts before he felt a very strong blow and that he was pushed aside. The guy fell to the ground and this huge man walked forward. He was interested in the question of where she was, in which room she was. This man walked and talked about the fact that his daughter's killer also has a daughter. This was good. This was very good for him. Because he said that he was already desperate, but finally his turn had come, and he would be able to avenge the murder of his daughter. At that moment he took out a hammer and took it in one hand. Of course, he wanted to do the same as they did with his daughter. The guy saw this hammer and tried to stop this man and put his hand on his shoulder. But this man was so aggressive that he didn't talk for long, turned around and hit the guy with all his might. He fell to the ground and blood splattered in all directions. The guy was lying on the ground. There was a pool of blood next to him. The others were just scared and they started shouting for this guy to stop and what he was doing. The door to the room where the girl was opened slightly and one of her hands was visible. One of the guys shouted that he had already said that there would be problems because of the violence. The man who stabbed and tried to avenge his daughter wondered why this guy stood in his way. The girl saw that the numbers above her friend's head had completely changed and it was already a ratio of 109 and he did not move at all. The numbers were changing quickly and now the place of 9 was 8. This man was shouting that he was ready to pay back for what he received with exactly the same coin. He thought that it would be right. At that moment she was standing behind this man and holding a huge knife in her hands. She saw her friend and saw the ratio, which was constantly decreasing. Instead of 8 it was 5. She finally understood everything and now it became clear to her that she sees everything absolutely correctly. Before that, when she saw the numbers above his head for the first time, it meant that she could see every hour and every minute. It was the poet who each time saw different numbers and different ratios above his head. Now she can see every second of her friend's lifetime and this time is decreasing very quickly. And she finally realized that all these people who were watching him and waiting for her at the gate simply needed the existence of the killer's daughter. Whoever she was, they just needed someone. It didn't matter who to carry out their revenge. They just needed a scapegoat that they could pounce on with curses, and she is the one who can become like his father. That's why she raised this huge knife and said if this is what they want and if this is what they really want, then she is ready to show it to them. At that moment the masked man grabbed her hand. The knife fell from her hand and he prevented her from committing the crime. At some point she had already truly come to terms with the fact that this was her destiny and she was no longer ready to prove anything to them. With these words she had signed her own death warrant. The one who was ready to kill her just a few minutes ago stood and silently looked at this girl. In the hand of the masked killer, whose number was called, appeared the very knife with which the girl came out to kill. He asked her, If this is what she really wants, and these are in fact her last words, he stood and looked into her eyes. She didn't say anything else to him, after which he swung and dealt her a fatal blow. Blood spurted in all directions. The guys continued filming and uploading to one of their channels. They showed how this man hit the guy who was blocking his way with a hammer. Many were outraged because violence was shown on this channel, but this man did not understand why they prevented him from passing. Many left comments that these were unreal events. The man on the screen was screaming that he had to give back as much as he had to endure during all this time. He talked about how he needed to pay back in kind for everything they did to him, but in the comments they wrote that a girl with a knife was standing next to him and he had to be careful. At that moment, the phone on which all the events were filmed and posted on the internet was simply smashed with one blow of a knife. One of those filming the events on his phone was simply in shock because he couldn't even imagine that something like this could happen. Everything that happened next was not filmed on camera, but only they could see with their own eyes how the girl swings a knife. And as the guy in the black mask grabs her hand and the knife falls out of her hand, it was unclear that I was the decisive factor that made the girl a suspected murderer. Was it really all about the heredity that she received from her father? Or maybe it's not like that at all, and it's not a matter of heredity but of the society in which she lived. Or is it because of the blind confidence of the people around her that did not give her a single chance to live in this society? That's why he destroyed her, because the number of people she could kill in this life increased above her head. He clearly remembered her last look. When she looked at him, her pupil was very dilated. But despite this having done his job, he thought that there was no one who would have influenced the fact that she became a murderer. In fact, it should not have concerned him in any way. He should have destroyed those people over whom there was the greatest flickering of the number. The girl slowly fell to the ground after his blow, but she was still alive. Everything that happened at that moment was seen by a fairly large number of people, of which there were two who were filming one father of the deceased girl. The phone that was used to film everything that was happening was simply broken and lying on the ground. In front of them stood a guy who had a mask on his face and thick bangs. His face was not visible at all. The guys who were filming were very scared and didn't shout at the man to come to them as quickly as possible. But since I didn't approach them here, they very quickly tried to disappear from this place because they thought that because of the stream they were being dragged into this matter. The man who came to this place to take revenge did not understand what had just happened. He was a little upset. In front of him, in a pool of blood, lay a girl whom he believed he should have killed. That's why he couldn't come to terms with it. He thought that it couldn't be he was the one who had to do it. He was simply furious, and from this fury he screamed that he had to kill her. The girl was lying on the ground. She was still conscious and could see through slightly open eyes. The killer number approached this man and grabbed him by the throat, thus trying to stop him. When he calmed down here, he said that he should forgive him, but this also concerned him. He turned his head towards the killer and saw that the number one was flickering above this man. After which he let go and the man fell to his knees on the ground right in front of the girl's body. The girl tried with all her might to find out who he was and why he stopped her. The killer number did not reveal his face. He stood silently and looked at her, after which he lowered his head and quietly said that the blade was completely rusty, which is probably why he couldn't kill her right away, and then added that the numbers hadn't disappeared. When he said about numbers, the girl was very surprised. Could he really see some numbers too? She asked what he said and what numbers he sees, because is he really the same as her? She looked at him and thought of only one thing. He also sees numbers, which means he has the same talent as she does. The killer number answered her that when he looks at a person, he sees numbers above his head. And now they are above her head. He also sees numbers that have not disappeared. He told her that she must kill another 4,000 people. Her head was spinning. She remembered the news where she said that the only thread that runs between them is the wounds in the form of numbers on the body. She also recalled the professor's speech that they didn't know exactly what the motive was and what the numbers meant. I clearly remembered what they said about who else a child with such genetics could grow up to be and how they treated her. At some point her thinking didn't break down, and she thought that if the whole society wants this, then she will become what they want. Now it became clear to her because he said that she had to kill another 4,000 people. That's a lot. At that moment she didn't feel sorry for herself at all. She understood that this was the only way out, and now she understood who this person was. It became clear to her that all the murders and the numbers that were on their hands, they were all the same as she was. She felt a ratio above her head, the number. She had 32 seconds left until the end of her life. She felt her head spinning. She saw a flicker, and before her eyes there was 31. She thought that it seemed that was how much time she had left to live. Turning her head, she saw her friend who had come to her lying on the ground in a pool of blood, and there were also numbers above his head. He had 50 seconds left. She thought that he would live only 1 minute and she couldn't let him die like that. And she wanted to do at least something. She turned her head and saw the killer whose number was called. He asked her again if she had anything else to say before she died. The girl gathered the rest of her strength that she had and squeezed out what she really wanted to say. She asked about that man, why the killer number left him alive, because he was going to kill her friend. In fact, the masked killer understood that the girl, I myself, did not understand the reason for my question. So he asked what was so unusual. Was that really all she wanted to know and say before she died? Then the masked killer said that he didn't kill the man because he was number one. Even if he killed one person to save some kid, it wouldn't change the fact that someone had to die. The girl lay with her eyes open with the last of her strength. She could no longer say anything. Her eyelids were becoming heavier and heavier. The only thing she could squeeze out of herself was a few more words that she understood everything. Immediately after these words, her hand fell and did not move at all. It seemed that life was leaving her. And at that moment, or rather at that moment, as the killer finished speaking, he raised his knife to finish the job. And the girl, who ran out of strength, lost consciousness and closed her eyes. She lay in a pool of blood, unconscious. That's when it all happened. He stood and looked at her. I don't understand, because it was the first time this happened to him. What happened was something unexpected. He had never seen anything like this happen to anyone before. The number that was above her head, after a certain click, began to decrease sharply, and after a few seconds it was at its minimum. He looked at the girl and watched as the numbers flickering above her head became smaller and smaller, and they were already single digits. After which he saw that the number 1 appeared above her head again, the same number as when he saw her the first time. He realized that in this case he could not complete the work he had started because he acted exclusively according to the rules. He did not kill those who had the number 1 over their heads. Memories came to his mind that he wanted to forget, but decided that he still needed to do it. He remembered the first time he thought that he had to do this if no one else could do it. He then asked what he would have to do if it was confirmed that the numbers were not decreasing. Everything happened very quickly. He watched as the numbers above the girl decreased, and he thought that this would be the end of it. But he saw again how they swung the hammer and understood that another murder would happen right before his eyes. It was the same man who held a hammer in his hand. He shouted while swinging the hammer that the young man should die. When the killer number turned and parried the blow of the hammer that almost killed him, he saw nothing that surprised him. This man, despite the fact that his blow was parried, swung, and once again he shouted that it was his, that it was only his. After which he tried to hit the killer number several more times, but the guy dodged his blows, and this man shouted that he had to do it. When the killer number looked at him, he saw that the number 2 was flickering on his head. This man screamed that no one has the right to take away from him the last reason for which he lives. The killer thought that in this case everything is happening the other way around and the score is increasing. He thought that something is wrong here and what is happening here. But he reacted quickly because it couldn't go on like this for long. He took out his knife and hit the man's hand. The hammer he was holding in that hand fell to the ground because his hand was injured and he couldn't hold anything with it. The killer then pushed the man with his foot so that he tripped and fell to the ground. Come to this man, the killer number told himself that he needs to calm down before this has happened several times. He decided that he would think about it later, but now he had to act according to his changed fate and situation. To everyone's surprise, the man grabbed the hammer with his other hand and tried to swing it. After which he stood up and, holding this hammer with both hands, decided to strike the unconscious girl lying on the ground. This man had only one task: to kill this girl, but at the moment when he already swung, he got hit in the head. It was the last minute of this man's life, and he thought only about the place for his daughter, whose photograph he kept with him. The man who fell to the ground turned to his daughter. He asked her for forgiveness. He asked her to forgive her father. Within a few minutes, a police car appeared at the doorstep of this house because it was very noisy. The place where it all happened was quiet, and no one heard such noise, so the neighbors called the police. When the killer number heard that the police were very close, he needed to understand what to do. In front of him lay a guy who was still breathing and who had the right to this life, so he definitely wouldn't touch him. Also in front of him lay a girl who was also still breathing and was still alive. He also did not intend to kill her. He caught himself thinking that he simply had no words for this whole situation. He remembered this blonde girl, how her numbers increased from 1 to 4,000 and then began to decrease back to 1. He looked at her and wondered who she was and why such strange things were happening to her alone. Then he decided that he wouldn't bother much because he had already decided everything. Moreover, the police car was very close and he needed to leave this place as soon as possible. I drove my car as close to this house as possible and did it unnoticed. He took her and put her her in the front passenger seat, buckled her in, and very quickly left that place. The girl was still unconscious, she was still alive, he wanted to figure out who she was, that's why he took her. And the most important thing is that it seems strange to him that she also sees numbers above a human head, so he decided that he needed to figure this out completely.